Phuoc Tuy Province, Vietnam. June 1971. The ambush is over. 11 seconds ago, the last shot was fired. The Viet Cong force that walked into the killing zone is dead or scattered. The Australian SAS patrol, 10 men who have been lying motionless in the bush for 6 hours waiting for this moment, should be withdrawing right now. That is the doctrine. That is the training. Ambush, kill, withdraw before enemy reinforcements arrive. But Sergeant Frank Cashmore is not moving. He is staring through the darkness at a body 30 meters away. A Viet Cong commander, lying face down in the dirt, and slung across that dead man's shoulder is a canvas message pouch. Cashmore knows what might be in that pouch: maps, orders, intelligence that could reveal enemy plans for the entire province. He also knows that VC reinforcements are moving toward this position right now, that the kill zone is still active, that doctrine says you never, ever go back into a kill zone after an ambush. And he knows that no one is ordering him to retrieve that pouch. No one expects him to. The mission is complete. His men are safe. They can leave. But in about 5 seconds, Frank Cashmore is going to make a decision that will save lives he will never meet and define what heroism actually means. In June 1971, an Australian SAS sergeant made a choice that had nothing to do with the firefight he had just won, and everything to do with the war that would continue after he left. Walking alone back into a live kill zone to recover enemy documents that would prevent a massacre. Before we talk about what Frank Cashmore did, you need to understand what the Australian SAS was doing in Vietnam in 1971. The war was winding down. American forces were withdrawing under Vietnamization. The headlines were about peace talks and troop reductions, but in Phuoc Tuy Province, Australia's area of operations in the south, the war was not winding down. It was escalating. Intelligence reports through early 1971 indicated something big was building. SAS reconnaissance patrols operating along the border between Phuoc Tuy and Long Con provinces were detecting large concentrations of Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army units. More movement than usual, more supplies being cached, more communication traffic. The signs pointed to a major offensive, but intelligence could not tell them when or where it would hit. This was the SAS mission, deep reconnaissance. Small patrols, usually 5 to 10 men, inserted into enemy-controlled territory for days or weeks at a time. Their job was to watch, to listen, to map enemy movements, to ambush small groups when the opportunity presented itself, and most importantly, to gather intelligence. The SAS did not fight like conventional infantry. They avoided large-scale engagements. They moved silently. They struck without warning and disappeared before the enemy could respond. In the jargon of special operations, they were economy of force. A small number of highly trained soldiers achieving strategic effects far beyond their size. Frank Cashmore was one of those soldiers. By June 1971, Cashmore was a sergeant in 2 Squadron, SASR. This was his second tour in Vietnam. He had first deployed in 1968 and led a patrol that became legendary within the regiment, an ambush of a Viet Cong convoy that killed 18 to 20 enemy soldiers in a single engagement. The operation earned him a mention in dispatches and established his reputation as a patrol commander who could be trusted with the hardest missions. 3 years later, he was back, older, more experienced, leading a 10-man ambush patrol in an area where the enemy was massing for something no one fully understood yet. The mission was routine by SAS standards: establish an ambush position along a known enemy infiltration route. Wait. If a target presented itself, a patrol, a supply party, a command element, engage and destroy, then withdraw before reinforcements arrived. Routine, clinical, based on doctrine refined over years of jungle warfare. But doctrine assumes that when the shooting stops, the mission is over. Doctrine assumes that survival takes precedence over everything else. Doctrine assumes that soldiers will do what they are trained to do and nothing more. Frank Cashmore was about to violate every one of those assumptions. The ambush site was selected based on intelligence and terrain analysis. A trail junction near the border, triple canopy jungle that provided cover and concealment, good fields of fire, multiple withdrawal routes. The patrol moved into position in darkness. 10 men, each carrying enough ammunition, water, and rations for several days, radios for communication with headquarters, claymore mines to extend the killing zone. They settled into their positions and disappeared. This is the part of war that does not make it into movies. The waiting, hours of absolute stillness, not moving, barely breathing, watching a trail where nothing happens, listening to jungle sounds, birds, insects, the occasional rustle of an animal moving through undergrowth. You cannot scratch an itch, cannot adjust your position to relieve cramping muscles, cannot swat mosquitoes or leeches. Any movement might give away the ambush, so you freeze and you wait. The human body is not designed for this. After the first hour, muscles begin to cramp. After 2 hours, your mind starts playing tricks. Is that movement on the trail or just shadows shifting as the wind moves branches? After 4 hours, the discipline required to remain motionless becomes a physical effort. SAS soldiers trained for this. They practiced lying in ambush positions for entire days without moving. They learned to slow their breathing and heart rate. They learned to ignore discomfort and focus on the mission. But training cannot eliminate the mental strain. The knowledge that at any moment the enemy might appear. That when they do, the next 10 seconds will determine whether you live or die. That everything depends on timing, discipline, and the ability to make instant decisions under pressure. Cashmore and his patrol waited for 6 hours. Then just before midnight, they heard voices. Movement on the trail, figures emerging from the darkness. A Viet Cong patrol moving through the ambush site. SAS ambushes followed a precise sequence. The patrol commander, in this case, Cashmore, controlled initiation. He would wait until the maximum number of enemy soldiers were inside the killing zone, then trigger the ambush with a command-detonated claymore mine or by opening fire himself. The goal was to achieve total surprise, to kill or wound as many of the enemy as possible in the first seconds before they could react or take cover. Speed and violence overwhelmed the target before they understood what was happening. Cashmore waited, letting the enemy patrol move deeper into the killing zone. Counting bodies, assessing the situation, his finger resting on the trigger. Then he initiated. The jungle exploded. Claymore mines detonated with a distinctive crack, sending hundreds of steel ball bearings through the kill zone. Rifles opened fire. Tracers lit up the darkness. The engagement lasted seconds. When the shooting stopped, the trail was silent. Multiple enemy casualties. The patrol had been destroyed. Among the dead was a Viet Cong commander. Not a common soldier or low-level cadre, but a senior officer identifiable by his equipment and the canvas message pouch slung across his body. That pouch likely contained maps, orders, intelligence about enemy operations, the kind of documents that could reveal what the SAS had been looking for, details of the coming offensive. But the pouch was 30 meters away, in the middle of the kill zone, and the mission was over. Standard doctrine was unambiguous. Withdraw immediately. Do not linger in an ambush site. Enemy reinforcements will respond to the sound of gunfire. The longer you stay, the more likely you are to be surrounded and killed. Every SAS soldier knew this. It was drilled into them during training. Ambush doctrine emphasized speed and withdrawal. You hit the enemy and disappear before they can react. You do not stop to search bodies or collect souvenirs. You move. The patrol began preparing to withdraw. Weapons were checked. A quick headcount confirmed everyone was accounted for. The route was clear. And then Frank Cashmore made a decision that no one expected. He was going back. Cashmore told his second-in-command to prepare the patrol for withdrawal. Then he moved forward, alone, into the kill zone. This was not ordered. No one told him to do it. No tactical requirement existed. The mission, destroy enemy patrol, gather intelligence through observation, was complete. The patrol had succeeded. They could leave with a clean win and 0 casualties. But Cashmore had seen the message pouch. He understood what it might contain, and he made a calculation that weighed his own life against the possibility of saving others. He walked back into the killing zone. The bodies were still warm. Smoke from the claymore detonations hung in the air, the smell of cordite and blood. Darkness broken only by scattered moonlight filtering through the canopy. Cashmore moved carefully, not because he feared the dead, they were no threat, but because the living were coming. Viet Cong reinforcements would be moving toward the sound of the ambush right now. They might arrive in minutes, and when they did, anyone still in the kill zone would be trapped. He reached the commander's body, knelt, worked the canvas pouch free from the dead man's shoulder. The weight of it told him it contained something substantial, documents, maps, exactly what he had hoped. Behind him, his patrol was ready to move, watching him, waiting, knowing that every second he spent in the open was another second closer to contact with enemy reinforcements. Cashmore secured the pouch and moved back to the patrol's position. The entire retrieval took perhaps 30 seconds. It felt like an hour. Then they withdrew, moving fast through the jungle, putting distance between themselves and the ambush site, following planned routes that would take them to an extraction point where helicopters could pull them out. They made it. No contact with enemy reinforcements. No casualties. A clean mission with a bonus. A canvas pouch full of documents that would prove to be more valuable than anyone knew. Back at the forward operating base, intelligence officers opened the pouch. Inside were maps marked with positions and movement routes, written orders detailing planned attacks, operational timelines, the complete blueprint for a major Viet Cong offensive targeting Australian and South Vietnamese forces in Phuoc Tuy Province. This was exactly what intelligence had suspected but could not confirm. The SAS patrols had been detecting enemy buildup. These documents explained what that buildup was for, where the attacks would hit, when they would begin, which units were involved. The intelligence was immediately disseminated to higher command, Australian Task Force headquarters, Allied forces, South Vietnamese units, everyone who needed to know. Plans were adjusted, units were repositioned, defenses were reinforced, patrols were increased in the areas the documents identified as targets. The Australian and South Vietnamese forces prepared for an offensive they now knew was coming. When the Viet Cong launched their attacks, they did not achieve surprise. They met prepared defenses, coordinated responses, forces that had been warned and were ready. The offensive failed. Enemy casualties were high. The objectives were not achieved. And the reason, though it would never be publicly announced in a way that credited a single patrol, was that Sergeant Frank Cashmore had walked into a kill zone to retrieve a canvas pouch. The lives saved cannot be counted. How many Australian soldiers were not ambushed because their units were moved? How many South Vietnamese troops survived because they were reinforced before the attack came? How many civilians were not caught in crossfire because the battles happened in prepared defensive positions instead of villages? Unknown, unknowable but real. One decision, 30 seconds in the darkness, a choice to risk one life for the possibility of saving many. There is a tendency when talking about military heroism to focus on the dramatic, the charge under fire, the last stand, the overwhelming odds. These make for compelling stories because they are visually and emotionally clear. Man versus danger, courage under pressure, life or death. Frank Cashmore's heroism was different, quieter, harder to explain to people who have never been in combat. because the shooting was over when he acted. The threat was not immediate, it was potential. He was not saving a wounded comrade in front of him. He was saving people he would never meet in battles that had not happened yet, based on intelligence that might or might not be in a pouch he had not yet opened. This is what separates heroism from bravery. Bravery is reacting to danger. Heroism is choosing danger when you could choose safety. Every element of Cashmore's decision fits the definition of gallantry. Voluntary exposure to extreme danger. He was not ordered to retrieve the documents. No tactical requirement compelled him. He could have withdrawn with the patrol and no one would have questioned his judgment. Instead, he chose to put himself at risk. Violation of safety doctrine. Standard ambush procedure dictates immediate withdrawal. Lingering in a kill zone, even for seconds, violates every rule designed to keep soldiers alive. Cashmore knew this. He had been trained on this. He deliberately ignored doctrine because he believed the potential gain was worth the risk. Action taken solely for others. There was no personal benefit, no glory in retrieving documents. That is intelligence work, not combat heroics. The only reason to act was to protect fellow soldiers and allies who would face the enemy in the coming weeks. Strategic impact beyond the immediate situation. This was not about winning one firefight or saving one patrol. The intelligence Cashmore recovered altered the course of operations across the entire province. It affected planning at the task force level. It influenced battles he would never participate in and saved lives he would never know about. Willingness to sacrifice self for mission. If enemy reinforcements had arrived while Cashmore was in the kill zone, he would likely have died. He knew this, he accepted this, and he acted anyway. These are the criteria that define gallantry in military tradition. Cashmore met every single one in the span of 30 seconds. Years later, when he was awarded the Medal for Gallantry, the citation would reference this action. Not the ambush itself. Successful ambushes were routine for the SAS, but the decision to go back, the walk into the kill zone, the choice that should not have been necessary but was. Frank Cashmore completed his second tour in Vietnam and returned to Australia. He left the military and lived a quiet life. He did not speak publicly about his service often. Like many special operations soldiers, he considered his work a job that required no explanation or celebration. The men who served with him knew. The regiment knew. But the broader public did not hear the story until much later, when historians began documenting the Australian SAS experience in Vietnam and veterans began sharing their accounts. The patrol members from that June night in 1971 remembered. They remembered waiting in the jungle while their commander walked back into the kill zone. They remembered the tension of those 30 seconds. They remembered the extraction and the later revelation of what the documents had contained. And they understood what they had witnessed. Not just a successful ambush, those were common enough, but a moment when someone made a choice that defied every instinct for self-preservation because he believed it was the right thing to do. That is rare, even in special operations, even among soldiers trained to operate under pressure and make hard decisions. Because the hardest decisions are not the ones you make during the fight. They are the ones you make after, when the immediate danger has passed and you are safe and you could walk away but choose not to. The offensive that the captured documents revealed never achieved its objectives. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces that had massed along the Phuoc Tuy border suffered significant casualties. Allied forces held their positions. The intelligence advantage provided by those documents, combined with the skill and courage of the soldiers who used that intelligence, prevented what could have been a devastating series of attacks. None of the official after-action reports mention a single SAS sergeant by name. That is not how intelligence works. The documents were analyzed. The information was disseminated. Plans were adjusted. The source of the intelligence became one more line in a report that was classified and filed and forgotten by everyone except the people who were there. But the impact was real, measurable in lives that continued, in attacks that failed, in soldiers who came home because they were prepared instead of surprised. One man, one decision, one walk back into darkness. There is a question that haunts every discussion of military heroism. What drives someone to risk everything for others? Psychologists study it. Historians document it. Military theorists try to cultivate it through training and culture. But the answer remains elusive because it operates at a level beyond rational calculation. Frank Cashmore walked into that kill zone knowing the risks. He was not ignorant of the danger. He was not acting on impulse or adrenaline. The firefight was over. His mind was clear. He made a cold, rational assessment of the situation and chose to act. Why? The simple answer is duty. He believed the intelligence was important enough to risk his life. He believed that his responsibility as a patrol commander extended beyond the immediate safety of his team to the broader mission of protecting Allied forces in the province. But duty alone does not fully explain it. Plenty of soldiers understand duty and still choose the safer option when given the choice. Duty might compel you to accept necessary risks. It does not compel you to volunteer for unnecessary ones. The deeper answer might be this. Cashmore understood that his skills and training put him in a unique position. He was one of the few people who could make that retrieval. His patrol was there. The opportunity existed. If he did not act, no one else would. And if no one acted, the intelligence would be lost and people would die. This is the burden of competence. When you are capable of doing something difficult and important that others cannot do, the choice becomes harder. You cannot pretend you do not have the ability. You cannot delegate the risk to someone less trained. You must decide, am I willing to risk myself to achieve this outcome? Cashmore decided yes. That is what separates the story from the statistics. Thousands of soldiers fought in Vietnam. Thousands displayed courage under fire, but very few were presented with a moment where they could choose safety or risk, with no external pressure, no orders, no immediate threat, and chose risk anyway. The medal for gallantry he eventually received was not for killing the enemy. The SAS killed many enemies over the course of the war. It was for what he did after the killing stopped. For 30 seconds of exposure in a kill zone that saved lives, he never saw in battles he never fought. That is the textbook definition of heroism. Not the dramatic charge or the last stand, but the quiet decision to do what is right when it would be easier to do nothing. If you walked away from this story believing that heroism is about firefights and kill counts, you missed the point. Frank Cashmore's most heroic moment had nothing to do with the ambush. The ambush was professional, clean, effective, standard for the SAS. His heroism was walking back. That distinction matters, because it reveals what heroism actually is, choosing to act when inaction is safer, accepting risk for outcomes that benefit others, operating according to principles that transcend self-preservation. Every military in the world recognizes this. Medals for gallantry are not awarded for doing your job. They are awarded for exceeding your job, for going beyond what is required or expected, for voluntary action under extreme risk. Cashmore's action checks every box, and it matters that we recognize this, not to glorify war, but to understand what we ask of soldiers and what the best of them give. Because the wars continue, the threats evolve, the technology changes, but the fundamental dynamic remains the same. Small groups of highly trained individuals operating in dangerous environments where split-second decisions have strategic consequences. Those individuals will face moments like the one Cashmore faced, moments where doctrine says one thing and intuition says another, moments where safety and mission conflict, Moments where no one is watching and no one would blame them for choosing the easier path. What they do in those moments defines them, not their training, not their equipment, their choices. Frank Cashmore chose to walk back into the kill zone. He chose to risk his life for intelligence that might save others. He chose mission over safety, duty over survival, others over self. That is why, decades later, when historians and soldiers talk about the Australian SAS in Vietnam, his name comes up. Not because he had the highest kill count or the most dramatic firefight, but because in a moment where no one would have questioned the safer choice, he made the harder one. And it worked. The intelligence was recovered, the offensive was blunted, lives were saved. But even if it had not worked, if the documents had been empty or the intelligence had been wrong or enemy reinforcements had arrived 30 seconds earlier, the decision would still have been heroic. Because heroism is measured by intent and risk, not outcome. Cashmore went into that kill zone knowing he might die, knowing that the patrol could leave without him if things went wrong, knowing that his death would be his own fault for violating doctrine. He went anyway. That is the story. That is the lesson. That is what we mean when we talk about gallantry in combat. Not the Hollywood version with dramatic music and slow motion. The real version, where a man makes a decision in darkness and walks 30 meters that feel like 30 kilometers and comes back with something that matters. The Australian SAS remembers, the patrol members remember, and now you know why. Because June 1971 in Phuoc Tuy Province was not just another ambush. It was the night someone demonstrated what it means to earn a medal for gallantry. Not by killing the enemy, but by walking back for a canvas pouch when everyone else was leaving. If you served in Vietnam or know someone who did, if you have stories of quiet decisions that changed outcomes, of choices made when no one was watching, please share them. These moments matter. They define what service means. They deserve to be remembered not for their drama but for their truth.